All right, so get this. We're diving into some pretty crazy drama that happened at the White House.
Oh, yeah.
Just picture this: Ukrainian President Zelenskyy visits to sign this mineral deal with President Trump.
Yeah.
A deal that's supposed to bring peace, but instead of like handshakes and, all the smiles, it ends in this huge public blow-up.
It's like a political thriller almost, right?
Yeah, you can't make this stuff up.
I mean, it really is.
Yeah.
And it shows so much about the relationship between the U.S. and Ukraine.
Right.
And like how all that global power stuff is changing. We've got all this stuff, news clips and expert commentary from guys like General Jack Keane and Yanis Varoufakis, the economist.
Yeah.
We even have some whispers from folks in the White House.
Oh, wow, juicy.
Yeah, we're going to use all of this and really try to figure out what happened.
Exactly. We're not trying to take sides or anything.
Right.
This deep dive is all about understanding every side,
Mm-hmm.
all the power moves, the whole thing.
The whole 9 yards.
Are you ready to unpack all this?
Let's do it. So to really get this drama, you have to see how it all started. Zelenskyy gets to the White House, and right away things are tense. He's not even wearing a suit.
Really?
Yeah, and it seems like he did that on purpose. Some say it was like a power move or something.
Interesting.
Yeah, like he was showing that he wasn't going to be intimidated, and Trump definitely noticed it too.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the White House.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, wear a suit.
And then at the press conference, things get really heated up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Vice President Vance just straight up criticizes Zelenskyy right there in front of everyone.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, he says Zelenskyy isn't showing enough appreciation for all the billions in aid the U.S. has given.
Ouch.
Yeah, it was a bold move, for sure.
It was.
Yeah, and that's when Zelenskyy really fires back.
Really?
Yeah, he brings up how the past U.S. administrations like Obama and Biden, they didn't do enough when Russia first invaded Ukraine back in 2014.
Wow.
He's basically saying, where were you guys when we really needed you?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and he doesn't stop there. He says that talking to Putin is just pointless because Russia always breaks the ceasefires and there's just no trust at all.
It's true.
Yeah, and Zelenskyy goes even further. He says he wants guarantees that Ukraine will be protected before he even thinks about a ceasefire.
Wow, he's drawing a line in the sand.
Yeah, it's a risky move, but you can see his frustration. He's leading a country that's constantly under threat, and he feels like the people who promised to help have let him down.
Right, well, let's look at it from the Trump administration side.
Okay.
I mean, they're pretty annoyed by what they see as like Zelenskyy not being grateful enough for all the help the U.S. has given.
Oh, absolutely. They feel disrespected, and they see his public criticism of the president and vice president as like a huge mistake, diplomatically speaking,
Yeah.
The administration is saying that Trump genuinely wants peace and that he sees this mineral deal as a big step towards getting there.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But then you have General Jack Keane, this well-respected military analyst. He suggests that maybe Zelensky's outburst was all planned out.
Yeah.
Like a tactic.
Right.
He thinks Zelenskyy knew he wasn't going to get those security guarantees from Trump, so he decided to make a scene and play the victim.
It's a very interesting theory for sure.
Yeah.
Keane is saying that by kind of standing up to Trump, like that Zelenskyy made himself look like a fearless leader back in Ukraine, which is a risky move, but it seems to be working because his approval ratings back home have actually gone up since all this happened.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it really makes you think about how public image plays into all of this international relations stuff.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way. It's almost like he's using this very public platform to send a message not just to Trump, but to the American people and everyone else. He's saying, look, we're fighting to survive here, and we need real support, not just promises.
That's a great point. It really shows that Zelensky's playing a different game here. He's not just negotiating with Trump. He's trying to get everyone on his side and pressure Putin at the same time.
So let's talk about this mineral deal that started this whole mess. What was actually being offered and why was it so important?
So basically, the deal would have given U.S. companies access to all these valuable minerals in Ukraine, the stuff used in everything from electronics to weapons.
Okay.
The Trump administration saw it as a win-win, boosting the U.S. economy and helping Ukraine become more stable at the same time.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But not everyone agrees that it was such a great deal for Ukraine, right?
Yeah, some experts are saying it would mostly benefit the U.S. and that Ukraine would be giving up too much control over its own resources.
So it makes you wonder, was this deal really about peace or was it more about, economic and strategic advantage?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
It's something we need to really dig into because this whole clash of personalities and all these competing interests ended up stopping a deal that could have had huge consequences for both Ukraine and the U.S.
And it gets even more complicated when you think about Zelensky's response after basically being kicked out of the White House.
Mm.
He said he's still open to signing the deal, but he's not giving up on those security guarantees.
Yeah. It's a total stalemate now. Zelensky says he was misrepresented while the Trump administration is sticking to their story that he acted badly.
Wow.
This whole thing is a tangled mess of different stories, and it's hard to know what to believe.
Yeah, it really is.
It is. Yeah, it really is a mess diplomatically. And this is where all the other countries come in. Some European leaders are starting to talk about continuing aid and support for Ukraine, maybe even without the U.S. It's like they're saying, hey, we've got you, even if the U.S. doesn't.
Wow, that's a big deal. And Russia is just watching all of this happen with a smile on their face.
Yeah.
Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, actually praised Trump's approach to the whole thing.
Yeah.
I bet that didn't make a lot of people in Washington happy.
No, probably not. It just shows that Russia loves it when the U.S. and its allies aren't getting along. If the U.S. steps back from Ukraine, it creates an opportunity for Russia to step in. It's like they're playing chess, and the U.S. just made a really bad move.
Okay, hold on. We need to talk about NATO for people who don't know. NATO is like this military team formed after World War II. Basically, they promise that if one member gets attacked, it's like they all get attacked. And Ukraine, even though it's not a member, is still considered a partner.
Right, and that's why this is all so important. If the U.S. ditches Ukraine, what does that tell other NATO allies, especially the ones close to Russia? It could be like saying, hey, don't count on us if things get rough.
That's a scary thought. It could make Russia feel like they can do whatever they want in the region because the U.S. might not do anything about it.
Yeah.
This is just about Ukraine. It's about who has the power in Europe and even beyond that.
Exactly. And to make things even more complicated, economist Yanis Varoufakis says that the U.S. focusing so much on Ukraine is actually helping China. He thinks Trump should be more worried about keeping China in check, not getting stuck in some regional conflict.
It's like everyone has their own plan, their own goals. General Keane thinks Zelensky is using this whole public fight to his advantage. Varoufakis thinks the U.S. is playing the wrong game entirely. It's crazy how different experts can look at the same thing and have totally different ideas about it.
Yeah, it's like trying to put together a puzzle, but some of the pieces are missing. We have to consider all these different views, weigh what could happen, and try to make sense of it all. And it's not just about understanding what already happened, but what it means for the future, what's going to happen next.
Okay, so let's imagine some different scenarios. Scenario one, the U.S. completely walks away from Ukraine and leaves Europe to deal with a mess that seems unlikely, considering how important Ukraine is strategically, but it's not impossible, especially with the current administration's America First policy.
I agree. It would be a huge change in U.S. foreign policy, and it would definitely affect things around the world. But I think it's more likely that the U.S. and Ukraine eventually figure out a way to get along. But it'll be more like a business deal. You know, Trump might keep giving aid and military support, but only if Zelensky does what he wants and shows some appreciation.
So it's like a peace deal. But on Trump's terms, he gets the mineral deal. Zelensky gets some help, but their relationship is still messed up.
Yeah.
It's not perfect, but it's probably the most realistic outcome.
It's a practical way to look at it, but it doesn't really solve the bigger problems like the lack of trust and all those conflicting interests. And it could make Ukraine feel like they have to choose between the U.S. and Europe.
Which brings us to the third scenario. What if this whole thing pushes Ukraine closer to Europe? They've already gotten offers of support from European leaders. Could this be what makes Ukraine stronger and more independent, less reliant on the U.S.?
That's an interesting thought, and it's not like it hasn't happened before. We've seen other countries move away from the U.S. and make new alliances based on shared values and goals. It would be a big move for Ukraine, but it could end up with them being more stable and successful in the long run.
It's wild to think about how this whole blow-up in the Oval Office could affect things in the future. It could change alliances, shift the balance of power, and even redefine what the U.S. does in the world.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that things in geopolitics are always changing alliances, shift power dynamics change, and random events can have huge consequences.
This has really made me think about the real people caught in the middle of all this political stuff.
Yeah.
What about the everyday people in Ukraine who are living through this power struggle?
Yeah.
What does this mean for them? Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in all the political stuff, but we can't forget about the real people in Ukraine. What about them, the people living with the threat of war every day, where they don't know what's going to happen and their safety is so fragile?
It's something to think about for sure. You're right. We can't forget about the human side of this. Zelensky standing up to Trump like that resonated with Ukrainians because they want to have control over their own future. They've been through so much and shown so much strength, and they want a leader who will fight for them.
And it's not just about safety. It's about having dignity, about having a say in what happens in the world, even if it was calculated. Zelensky's actions show that they want to be recognized and respected.
Exactly. He's playing into that feeling. He's saying we're not just pieces in someone else's game. We're going to stand up for ourselves. And it's a powerful message, one that goes way beyond Ukraine.
So what happens now? What are the possible outcomes of this whole standoff? And what should we be looking out for?
Well, Ukraine's future is still uncertain. There are a few things that could happen. One possibility is that the U.S. and Ukraine find some middle ground, a deal where the U.S. gives some support and Zelensky makes some concessions. It might not be perfect, but it could help things become more stable.
But what if that doesn't happen? What if this whole thing changes everything and alliances start shifting around the world?
But that could definitely happen. We might see Ukraine moving away from the U.S. and getting closer to Europe. It's already starting to happen a little bit. We've seen European leaders offering help and support, maybe filling the space left by the U.S.
And if that does happen, what happens to the U.S.'s position in the world? Will they lose influence? Will it make Russia and China more powerful?
Those are the big questions we need to think about this situation. Shows how complicated things are in the world right now. Old alliances are being tested, new powers are coming up, and the old rules don't apply anymore.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the main thing our listeners should take away from all of this? What should they be thinking about as this story continues?
Here's what I'd say. Watch what everyone's doing. See how the U.S. reacts to Zelensky standing up to them. Look at how Europe positions itself in all of this. And keep an eye on what Russia does. This is a high-stakes game with big consequences, and it's not over yet.
And don't forget about the people involved. Remember, the people whose lives are being directly affected by all these political decisions. Their stories, their struggles, their hopes and dreams are at the heart of this conflict. Let's not forget about them as we try to understand these complicated and uncertain times.
Well said. This deep dive has been quite a journey. It's taken us from that tense room in the Oval Office to the bigger picture of what's happening in the world. We've looked at different perspectives, thought about people's motives, and trying to figure out what could happen because of this diplomatic mess.
And even though we don't have all the answers, we've learned more about what's shaping this important moment in history. It reminds us that everything in the world is connected, that things that seem isolated can have huge effects, and that we all have a part to play in making a more just and peaceful world.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the U.S.-Ukraine situation. We'll keep following this story and bring you more insights as things develop. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and keep asking the tough questions.